This episode of Mastering Modern Midlife is brought to you by Easy Spirit. Now, more than ever, we know life is about more than just shoes. Being comfortable in your own skin and making life easier is what matters most. Welcome to Mastering Modern Midlife. I'm Catherine Grace O'Connell, and this show is powered by the Forever Fierce Revolution. Delighted to introduce my guest today. Laura Bruno is a medical intuitive, a life coach, the incredible founder and creative behind AskLauraBruno.com, and she is also doing a new venture in soul-based readings in astrology. And I'm so excited to introduce her and share her amazing inspirational self with you. Welcome to the show, my friend. We're doing it again, aren't we?
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for having me on.
So I'll be really authentic with our audience today that we shot this show, maybe a couple months ago, and now I am prepared with all kinds of black onyx to ground me and protect ourselves, because you are a high vibrational being, sister, who tends to blow things up. Is that true?
This is true. I warned you guys.
Oh, well, we're so excited to have you back. And, you and I obviously met through a very dark night of the soul I was going through. I found you online, Googling in one of those many searches looking for answers with Lyme disease. And I found you and I found your blog, and it was a major turning point in my life.
So glad. Yeah, you have come such a long way since then, and just such an inspiration. I saw that you would be this and that you could do this, but I know you didn't believe me when I was telling you that initially.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that, because your gifts really help people to be able to step into things that, and own things inside of them that they don't even necessarily know are there. That certainly was my story. So let's talk a little bit about you, medical intuition. How does that differ from intuition, and your personal story that really led you to this whole new world in your own life?
So medical intuition is basically translating the body's messages. And a lot of times people think if they have an illness that their body's betraying them. And that's really not my philosophy or my experience in working with thousands of people. My experience is that when the soul wants our attention, it kind of knocks, and sometimes we'll feel that as a quote unquote random thought or a little intuition. And if it's not convenient or it's telling us to make a big change, then a lot of times people will hold back and it will knock a little louder. And eventually, if you keep not answering the door, then your body steps in and says, I'll get her attention. I'll make her pay attention. And you get a little symptom. And when it reaches the point where you really, really need to make this soul change, but you're really, really afraid, then usually the body steps in with more of a major health crisis. But that health crisis ends up giving you permission because it's requiring you to make the changes that you kind of already knew you needed to make. And so I find that the body never actually betrays us. It's a deep, dear love of our soul, and where we won't step in to have the courage to change, our body will say, I'll help you along. I'll bring you along. Come on, we'll do this together.
Yeah, our body is always talking, and it's really our job to listen. And the more present, awake, and aware we are in tune with our inner world, the more we can really hear those signs before they become louder and louder, and then it becomes a major health crisis. So you are the author of If I Only Had a Brain Injury, and this was your own really personal story and journey of those knocks and an entire new life purpose and path for you. So let's talk about your personal journey and how you had your own sort of awakening.
Well, when I was a child, I was very, very intuitive, and I was actually medical intuitive. I mean, I would sense if people had cancer, or if they had a problem in their body, or if there were soul things happening and their behavior was not matching who they truly were. Before I learned better, I would warn people. I'd say things like, hey, you need to stop doing that, or you're going to get cancer, or you need to do, and the problem was that that's real spooky when you're saying that to somebody and then a couple weeks later they get a diagnosis. So I learned at a young age, just be quiet about that stuff. You don't really mention it. And I was a big dreamer, and people knew that and would ask me for dream interpretation. But I was also very rational. I was on an academic track. I was going to be an English professor. And in my family, it was not a good idea to be too intuitive, because that was just one step away from being crazy. So in my early 20s, I was in graduate school. I got my master's degree in English literature. I was planning to get my PhD in English literature. But the truth is, I really hated graduate school. It was not the right environment for me. And so I thought, well, maybe it's just this school. And I took a couple years off. I did sales and traveled up and down the East Coast and applied to graduate schools again. I was accepted. I had scholarship, fellowship, and right around May of 1998, I started having these recurring dreams and waking up having the sense that I was not supposed to go to graduate school. This was not my path, that I was supposed to pull back my acceptance and just write poetry and be a landscaper and do spiritual work. And I thought, no way, that is just too weird, no. And it was very, very insistent. And then May 19th, 1998, I was on a sales trip, and I had a feeling I was going to have a car accident that day. Did everything I could to avoid it. And I was stopped at a red light. Somebody did not stop at that light. It turned green, and they saw the green, but they didn't notice that there were 3 cars stopped ahead of her. And the next thing I knew, I was waking up to a bunch of honking horns, and I had a brain injury. So that was a real life changer. As a result of the brain injury, I could no longer read. I could no longer write. Fluorescent lights gave me horrific migraines. My first migraine lasted 16 months. And it never really went away. It's just sometimes it would peak worse than other times. So that really ruled out graduate school. I put it on hold. Was totally disabled. And meanwhile, although I couldn't read words, I was suddenly able to really read people's energy. And I lost any filter that I used to have. So whereas I could keep the intuition and the medical intuitive awareness kind of at bay, or just only if I wanted it, I suddenly was just deluged with all of that energy. And long story short, it was a very long healing process. It took me 4 years before I could even work at all again. And people that I encountered through that path were telling me, oh, well, you're a healer. You're a healer. And eventually I couldn't do anything else. And this was just so online at the time for me that I thought, all right, I guess it really is my path. And I started out doing medical intuitive work in October 2001. I was still very brain injured, and gradually learned Reiki and started teaching Reiki. And over time, I just healed. Now you would not have any idea that I ever had a brain injury. I can read, I can write, I can do everything I could before.
That is so true. Knowing you the way you are, I mean, you're such a beautiful, bright soul. I would have never guessed that, but reading your story, it's a powerful story, and, got you onto your path and purpose in life. So let's talk about intuition, medical intuition, how they differ, and how our audience, the women in our audience, can, learn to really tune into their inner world.
So medical intuition is kind of a subset of our broader intuition. Everybody has some intuition, and people experience it in different ways. This is kind of a big misunderstanding that I find clients have. A lot of people expect that if you have intuition, you're just going to hear a little whisper in your head saying, turn right, or, call this person. And sometimes it does come like that. But for other people, they're much more kinesthetic and they feel it in their body. So the hair on the back of their neck might stand up when they're being warned, don't walk down that alley. Or they might get butterflies in their stomach when they meet someone who turns out to be a very important person in their life. And other people have dreams where they see things, or they'll have visions. And so just like people have 3 different ways to learn, with the visual, the auditory, and the kinesthetic, which is a body-based awareness, I find that while we can all have some of those, there's usually one area that's dominant for each person. And it's easiest to start there. As you start to trust your intuition more with your dominant way of intuiting, which is oftentimes your dominant way of learning. As you start to get more comfortable with that, then you also start to notice that you're getting corroboration in other ways. But it's a process, and I find confidence is a big part of it. So start where you have a strength already.
So you have a really unique vantage point when you meet a client. Usually, I would imagine some in person, but a lot online. That's how I met you. You can really get a sense of their energy. And Louise Hay brought this really out into the world, the whole idea of illness as a metaphor. Our body is always talking to us. And, if we feel like we have a pain in the neck in our lives, maybe it'll show up, as just a pain in our neck, literally. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about that, and illness really as a metaphor, and how we can begin to tune in when we have those, signs before something major happens.
So I think it's really important for people to realize that when something hits your body, it's meant to be obvious. Because if it has come to your body as a symptom, then usually that means that it's been doing the knocking for a while and you haven't been listening. And so body messages tend to be much less subtle than a lot of people would maybe think they are. So the pain in the neck example is a really good example. I often find that people will literally have a pain in their neck, or they'll have something going on with their thyroid, or something in the neck area. And what I see is that there are often clusters of symptoms. And this is a big clue for people. If you have, say you have a sore hip for a while, and then you get rid of the sore hip, and then you get a big bug bite there, and then you bump into something there. Like, that's your hip is trying to catch your attention. It's not about any one of those things. And so a good question with the hip, for example, is what are you kind of hemming and hawing about stepping forward into? Because if you think about it, if you lifted up your leg and you were going to take a step, but then you didn't put your foot down and you're pulling your leg back and bringing it forward, pulling back, bringing forward, your hip in real life would get sore. And I find that the metaphors are often like that, where there's kind of the general heads up of, okay, this body part has an illness or a symptom. But it's usually more about the metaphors connected to that area. So yeah, I guess that it's my English major training is coming into being again, because that's what English majors do. You analyze a text. And so for me, the whole body is a text and the soul is a text. And I just look for patterns and anomalies, repetitions, and look at the metaphors that way.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really brought us together. I want to read something. This is on your blog. So clearly we connected through Lyme disease. I'm going to obviously talk about your Lyme journal and really this whole process of self-discovery, but I'd like to read this. And to me, Lyme disease is, it is the perfect metaphor. I see it, what Lyme is, a corkscrew bacteria, right? And when we actually unwind it at the root, it seems to really unwind everything. It certainly did for me. And you were talking about vibrational energetic patterns, be it Lyme or any other illness. You, as a medical intuitive, can really see that in talking to as many people as you do and seeing their energy, that every illness has some sort of energetic vibration. So you write, Lyme disease tends to affect people who have big things to offer the world. These people may already seem to be on their path and often excel in multiple areas at once, including the healing arts. And then you said, the illness tends to appear in people who could go even deeper with their healing and creative gifts, but for one reason or another, feel locked into their current lifestyle. Then you go on in the next paragraph to say, Lyme seems to show up like a roto-rooter, forcing people to dig deep and remove all blocks to creativity and healing. To the outside world, these people usually look like they have no blocks because they're moving so effectively through life, but life has other plans. It's powerful. And if anyone out there really is dealing with Lyme disease in any way, taking care of someone, knows someone, it is such a crazy, crazy illness. And you brought me so much light and healing in that process. So let's talk a little bit about that and these vibrational energetic patterns and what you see when you're working with somebody with Lyme disease or really any illness.
So I do work with a lot of people that have Lyme disease. It's not the only illness that I deal with, but I guess because of that article and because there aren't that many people that do soul work with Lyme disease, I have a lot of clients that way. So the big patterns that I noticed, I wrote that article, I think that was a 2009 article. So since then, I have 10 more years of working with people with Lyme disease and related illnesses and injuries, because I find that the bandwidth for Lyme disease has a lot of crossover with the bandwidth for brain injuries, for example, also for MS. And in fact, it's very common for people to have had both a brain injury and Lyme disease because they tend to affect similar types of people and they tend to change your idea of who you are. So, one of the things that I realize with both brain injury and Lyme disease is, well, and really any illness, is it has a particular emotional bandwidth and mental, spiritual, and physical energetic bandwidth. And if you can just get yourself out of that bandwidth, then you're not really having the symptoms anymore. So you may still technically have Lyme, or you may still technically have brain damage, but you can effectively say the bandwidth is here, you can live your life here and sort of touch in there. But for the most part, it's almost like a holographic other imprint of you that you just start living from that space more. And I find for Lyme disease and other things that are really tricky to treat and very complicated, that being able to live from that other life, it's like your life of full potential. Being able to live from that space, it takes you out of the vibration where you're having the symptoms. And so the symptoms become what I call kind of like bumper bowling, if you know about that. So when children go bowling and they blow up those tubes,
Side rails? Yeah. The side rails.
Yeah, the side rails. Yeah. So they inflate those so that you can't get a gutter ball. And your symptoms can become that way too. If you're on the healing journey and you're making your improvements, you're living a more authentic life, and then all of a sudden a symptom shows up out of nowhere, then that's sort of like a bumper. That would be a moment to go, oh, wait a minute, was I going off path? Because a lot of our old patterns they're very well-worn tracks. And when you stop living consciously because you get emotional or you're really just involved in the moment or you're stressed or whatever reason takes you slightly off your focus and you go into the old mode, then those symptoms can become kind of a bumper that knocks you back in line so that you're living a much more magical and authentic life at the higher vibration.
Why Easy Spirit and Mastering Modern Midlife? Because we both believe in age positivity. Midlife is a time for women to design their life on their terms, and Easy Spirit is on a mission. as makers of shoes and experiences that are all about making life easy for all women, especially for you, the modern midlife woman. I move for women at Midlife and Beyond to help you ignite your ultimate potential and purpose. Easy Spirit wants to know, what do you move for? So I love that you share that, because certainly that was, my experience in healing. And one thing you really taught me, we talked a lot on these calls and about really introducing some new concepts. There's the whole quantum world and there's a linear world, or, jumping timelines, but we can keep it really simple. Healing does not have to be linear. We can actually make a quantum leap in our healing at any time, can't we?
Yes. And in fact, I find that spontaneous healing happens more often than people think it does. The problem is that it's so different that people kind of get freaked out by it, or they're overanalyzing it. They're noticing it so much that they overthink it and pop themselves back. And so one of the tricks is, if you're living this life here and you're unhealthy and you're miserable and you want to be over here and you want to be healthy and happy and all of that, is to find I call them overlays or bridges, where you have things that are similar and often little things can help. So if you're really frustrated because you're not well yet, find something in life that makes you feel a little bit healthier, just a little thing that reminds you of being healthy. And when you start incorporating many of these little habits into your life, and then you make a spontaneous healing jump, however that happens, you're much more comfortable there. It may still be a little strange, but you're more comfortable there. And so you're more likely to stick it out. And so I find as much as people want healing, it's also a big change, especially if something has been a very long-term linear slog, right? It's a habit. There's a lot of emotion, which is heavy, that's connected to it. And so to make that spontaneous leap, it requires kind of loosening the grasp of the old memories. And I think it's easier to replace than it is to remove. And so just upgrading your daily life experience little by little with things that remind you of what you would do when you're healthy, it helps people to make that leap.
Yeah, we talk about it in our community. We call it rewire, obviously, to rewire our brains, our thinking, create new healthy neural pathways. And you'd be surprised by how your health can just make incredible leaps forward. So you work with women all over the world. I imagine you work with a lot of women like me, midlifers, who are many in the process of reinvention, and oftentimes prompted by some sort of cataclysmic event in their lives. Maybe it's a divorce, maybe it's a health crisis, maybe it's getting aged out of your job, for whatever reason that really forces us to go on our path. So let's talk about that, midlife and the Phoenix rising.
So yeah, I have people of all ages, but I do have a lot of midwife women because it's such a rich time for people. A lot of times, you're going through these archetypal roles. So some people are going through the mother role. Some people are going through a divorce where they've been cast as kind of a Lilith figure or something, and they're having to reclaim themselves not just as single, but also as capable, as wild, as unique, all of that. And I just find that with the hormones of midlife too, it's kind of like second puberty. When you go through puberty, there's all these hormones which are very tied with our chakras. They're very tied with our emotional states and our energy centers. And there's changes then. And when you're in midlife, even as young as your mid-30s, your hormones are shifting. And we're familiar with menopause and perimenopause and all of that. But as things are really shifting there and you're having kind of fundamental changes inside your body, a lot of times it's calling for a bigger expression of who you are. And a lot of times midlife, when you're around age 42, you have what's called the Uranus opposition. And that's the typical midlife crisis. But from an astrological standpoint, Uranus is the great liberator, the kind of the cosmic weirdo, kick out the jams, get rid of limitations. And so that's going up against that expression in our natal chart. And that just from the cosmos can be an urge of, hey, where are you not being authentic? Where are you artificially being held back? And so a lot of things converge in midlife I think it's a time to be yourself much more.
So how do our thoughts in these stories we tell ourselves get us, basically in our own way? And how do we change them?
Well, a lot of thoughts come from, there's a couple things. One is thoughts that are repetitions of either teachers or parents or siblings, people in our early life that were telling us limiting things that we have now internalized. And most of that is so below the radar that people don't even know that they're doing it. And so that's a lot of my work in sessions, is paying attention to, okay, you said this and that sounds good. And I read that 95% of you believes that. So yeah, a lot of my work is rooting out some of those inner inconsistencies. And then the other thoughts that I find really influence people are, a lot of people are much more empathic than they realize. And so by empath, I mean, you're able to pick up on the emotions and the feelings of the people in your midst, and sometimes even the places around you. And if people don't realize that they have that gift, then it doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like you were having a perfectly fine day and now all of a sudden you're really angry, or all of a sudden you have a bizarre symptom that you can't explain. And so I find that educating people on the ways in which they are picking up on their environment and helping people to be more present with that really helps you to choose your own thoughts and choose your own affirmations and your own focus throughout life, rather than being overwhelmed by everything around you.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I know you talk a lot about empathy and empaths and being, sensitive, and we tend to see it as a negative, but it's actually a real positive. And that's a gift many women share.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. I mean, I couldn't do my work that I do if I weren't an empath. That's how I read people's energy. But it really helps to realize that for people, because a lot of times people are depressed or they're angry, and it's overwhelmingly causing negative thoughts, negative emotions that are adding to the illnesses that they're fighting. And so being able to say, oh, wait, this is not mine, is very helpful in being able to keep more of a focused direction on your own healing.
So let's talk about creativity and healing. That was obviously a huge turning point, and there were many aha moments working with you. And one of them was, the biggest one is, I'm laying in bed, full body seizures, and I can't function. I've got a caretaker. I can't do anything for myself. And you really, it was more than a gentle prodding. It was a, damn it, you're a creator. You are here to create. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? I was so mad. But there was a really cool story there that you shared about Matisse. So let's share that with the women in our audience.
So Matisse, and I found this story actually during my brain injury, and it's what led me to going back and doing my artwork that I do. But Matisse was actually supposed to take over the family business, which I think was law. He was supposed to be an attorney. And he got really, really sick and was bedridden for many months. And he just started drawing to kind of pass the time. And that was how he discovered that he had this amazing art talent. And if he had not gone through his extensive illness where he was literally bedridden and it was a life-changing illness, he couldn't practice law anymore, we wouldn't have one of the greatest artists of our times.
Yeah, it was amazing, because you literally said, do you know the story of Matisse? And I was like, no. And you shared this with me, that his greatest works of art were actually created right then from bed. And it was such a mindset shift for me in that moment that I began creating. And the healing that comes through creativity and self-discovery is talk about quantum leaps. So let's talk about that. How can these women really tap into, we're all creators, right? We're born from creation. So we're here to create, but in our own way.
Right. So I think part of the reason that creativity works so well with healing is that it puts you back in that co-creator role instead of just a victim of whatever's going on with your body. And it's also taking the energy and putting it into something that either gives it a release valve if it's negative energy or overwhelming emotions, or it gives you something positive to focus on that you're creating. And so, again, I think start where you're at. It doesn't have to be something that you have done before. It could be something that you've always had some interest in, and the illness becomes the permission to try something new because, well, you're having to invent so many other areas of your life. But having some kind of outlet, dance is wonderful. Painting is really great. You can do art therapy that way, but some people are more tactile and they want to do pottery. For other people, it's writing. It really does not matter what it is, so long as it brings you some sort of joy and or relief when you're doing it, and that you do it.
Yeah, and that you do it and you try multiple things until you get that thing that is, because I, continually said, I'm not a creator. And then I started, dabbling in different things. And I'm like so surprised by what I learned about myself. And so let's go on to self-discovery, which is really, your latest book project, which is a Lyme journal, and you call it a guided recovery workbook. And to me, this really isn't about Lyme, is it?
Not really. I wrote it because I have so many Lyme clients, but I have a lot of other people that have written to me or written reviews on Amazon saying, actually, I don't have Lyme, but I really like this book because it made me discover so many things about myself.
Yeah, no, it's a book that's filled with questions to really have you turn within and start answering those questions for yourself and start asking questions, questioning, I guess, everything in your life and those stories we tell ourselves, because we can't change them if we're not aware of them in the first place.
Right.
Yeah, so too. So tell me, we have women all over the world, obviously at midlife and beyond. I said, think 35, 40 plus, who many of them in the process of reinvention, maybe going through some difficult times. What are 3 action steps they can take in their own life? 3 simple steps to begin maybe, making some major changes that end up in these quantum leaps.
So the first one is related to what I was talking about with the empaths. And I call this the energy brush off or good energy hygiene. In Japanese, it's called kenyoku. But basically, you take your right hand, put it on your left shoulder, sweep down your arm past your fingertips. Do that on the other side. Left hand, right shoulder, sweep down your arm past your fingertips, and just do that. And then flick your fingers. I'm not going to aim it at the screen because I don't want to blow out your equipment, but flick your fingers like you wash your hands and there's no water. And I like to have people do that morning and night. So kind of when you brush your teeth, also do an energy brush off. And what that does is make you more in tune with your own energy field. And it kind of gets rid of anything else that you've kind of picked up by being around other people, so you can have better discernment of what you want, what you need, where you're going in your life. So that's an easy tip, but very, very important. Secondly, drink more water. I know that sounds really obvious, but it's not just about the water and hydration. That's very important, but it's also, if you're trying to make changes in your life, water is very fluid. Water is very strong. It can wear away stone, but it also is able to go with the flow. It's able to, move with whatever needs to change. And so hydrating yourself, you can also be real present with yourself when you're drinking the water, so that it's having more of a watery effect in your life. And the third one I would say is give yourself the benefit of the doubt. So many people, they may be compassionate with other people, but with themselves and myself too. I have to, I have to say, this is one of those challenges of being human, is that we tend to be much more difficult on other people, or on ourselves, than we are on other people. And so I like to say, if you're feeling really guilty about something, if you're feeling a big pressure for a should, or you're feeling some emotion that doesn't feel comfortable, instead of trying to just lift it up and make it go away, give yourself the benefit of the doubt that maybe there is a reason here, and allow yourself to explore that so that you can get more accurate feedback on what is going on in your life. And because it's those little changes, those little things, the little irritations, or the little joys that sort of surprise us, they give us a lot of information. And in our world, we're so accustomed to accommodating everything and everyone that a lot of times we just bat those things away before we even take note of them. So give yourself the benefit of the doubt that things are coming up for a reason, and that you probably are a good person. And so allow yourself to be compassionate with your choices and your needs as well.
That's so important. So you're in the midst of a new venture as well. You're kind of always in this process. I don't know if I call it reinvention, but just keep adding things to the mix here. Soul-based readings. I know, we talked a lot during my process of healing, and you introduced me to some concepts when it came to astrology that I wasn't familiar with, including the North Node. We're so familiar with these sun signs, and that's generally what we see for our horoscopes. But how did you get interested in astrology, soul-based readings? And tell us a little bit about this whole North Node and how we can see it in a whole new way.
So I have studied astrology since, maybe 2005. I actually got into it because I was writing a novel, and one of the main characters was an astrologer. And so I had to learn enough to kind of be conversant in it. And my friend Timothy Glenn actually provided a lot of consultation for that book. But I've been studying it since then, and I would just find that certain things would come up in people's lives. And I don't even know how I heard about the North Node. It might have been my friend Tanya, but this was many years ago, and it just, something connected with me with the idea of it. So you have a South lunar node and a North lunar node. And the lunar nodes it's basically where, so there's kind of it's called the ecliptic, and it's where the moon comes up, where the moon goes down. And so the North Node is where your soul's wanting to go. It's the direction that your soul is wanting to evolve in. And the South Node is kind of where you've been. So if you believe in past lifetimes, it's past life information. But it's also our old patterns, kind of our knee-jerk reactions in this lifetime, oftentimes early skills. And so your North Node is always the opposite of your South Node, and they change about every 18 months or so. So generally, if you're, let's say, can we use you as an example?
You sure can. Cancer, Leo.
So you have a Leo North Node. And if you think of the Leo sun sign, Leo's the lion, Leo's big-hearted, courageous, but Leos are also often in the spotlight. And I know when we first met, that was not, you weren't there. I mean, when I was telling you, you need to get out there.
So far from that, and so far from even beginning to see myself as where I am today.
Right. So, and for me, I have a Capricorn North Node. And so that means for you, your South Node is in Aquarius, which is much more about the group and kind of age of Aquarius, definitely not a me first attitude kind of thing. And whereas the Leo North Node is being more of an individual and being more in the spotlight. For me, I have a Capricorn North Node, which is being a little more business oriented, having better boundaries, being more goal oriented. My South Node is in Cancer, which is the nurturer and, very watery. Well, Cancer because you are a Cancer. So anyway, the South Node is more what you're comfortable with, things that you have already developed, but that you're outgrowing. And I find, especially with something like Lyme, which is such a life path illness, it's trying to get us on life path. The North Node becomes very important because that's where your soul's wanting to go. And in general, if you kind of lean into the North Node, you'll find that the doors of opportunity open wider for you. Whereas with South Node, after a while, the doors start slamming in your face. So all the things that you used to be able to rely on, that you were good at and that were familiar, just one thing after another, whether it's through illness or finances or relationship breakup, you can't go there anymore. And so I find helping people to realize, okay, well, where are you trying to go? It really gives them a place to read up on the topic and just some clues of, okay, this makes sense. Now I can go in this direction. And it's very helpful in making some of those quantum leaps too.
Yeah, I cannot wait to share this. We're talking about, doing some collaborations to bring this work more to the community, because to me, it opened my mind. Again, another mindset shift where I was able to see potential in me and really get on my life's path on something I never would have before if I didn't start reading and understanding that there's this other part of me. And it was filled with terror to actually get on that path because it was so uncomfortable for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and terror is often the feeling that people have when they're faced with North Node things, because it's the complete opposite of what you're familiar with. But what I find, and I do a lot of work with integration, so it's not about just getting rid of everything that you knew before, but about integrating it in the highest way in this new direction. And so for you, I mean, your work is very Aquarian, right? You are still trying to really serve people and have different ways of thinking about things. And I mean, you're doing that, but you're doing it from that Leo North Node perspective, where you're doing fashion and you are in the photographs and on the videos and on the radio and all of that.
Who would have thunk it, sister? I tell you, it's amazing when I think back to what you saw that I couldn't see. And I think that's really the beauty. And that really is the essence of my community, and surrounding women with beautiful women when their hearts are open and we can see things in others that we can't necessarily see for ourselves, and help others to open to that. So if women want to work with you, if they want to find you, where can they find you? Where can they find your books? Where can they get these readings, soul-based readings, and all of the good stuff on your beautiful website?
So my website is ASK, Laura, Laura, Bruno, Bruno.com, AskLauraBruno.com. It takes you to my WordPress blog. At one time, I think I had 5 or 6 websites, and everybody was saying, you know what, I just follow you on your blog. I really like your blog. So eventually I just consolidated everything to my blog. My books are available on Amazon. If I Only Had a Brain Injury is actually out of print at this time, but I still have a bunch of copies. So sometimes on Amazon, it's like $93 or something like that. I still, at this time in 2019, I still have some copies. So if you contact me through the contact form on my blog, I can find a way to get those to you. The Lyme Journal, a guided recovery workbook, is available on Amazon exclusively. And that is, I think it's 139 pages, but there's questions at the top of it and then space for you to fill in the answers below. So that's available on Amazon. And I'm working on another book, which I hope to get out early next year, called The Metaphysics of Lyme Disease, but that one I'm not finished with yet.
Well, I can't wait for it. Obviously, that was how we connected, and you are brilliant at everything that you do. I'm so honored to have had that experience, and you really led to a major life change here. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing, for being back on the show today. Hopefully, guys, we didn't blow up the airwaves, but we never know. This is, like I said, a high vibrational being. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
And thank you, sisters, for joining in, for being part of the Forever Fierce Revolution. I highly encourage you to check out Laura and her work at asklaurabruno.com and consider some work with her as a medical intuitive, maybe a soul based reading, or just check out her blog. There's some pretty phenomenal material there. And with that, beauties, thank you for being here and stay fierce.